Welcome to The Seed. It is great to have you sitting here with us today. We're so glad you're joining us for this.
Yeah, welcome in.
So we're doing a deep dive into the source material today, and I want you to just picture a scenario for a second. Imagine you are sitting on your couch. It's like 11 o'clock at night. The room's totally dark.
We have all been there.
Right. You're completely exhausted, just mindlessly scrolling through your phone, and you stop on a video of a total stranger, someone who lives, thousands of miles away. And they're crying.
Like really raw, genuine tears.
Exactly. Real tears. They're talking about the crushing weight of their anxiety or this intense feeling of inadequacy. And you, sitting there in the dark, you actually relate to it on a visceral level. You feel this profound surge of empathy for them.
It's a very human reaction.
It is. But here is the wild part. 3 minutes later, without even really processing what just happened, your thumb hits Apple Pay. And you've just spent like $85 on a botanical face serum.
A serum you've literally never heard of.
Never heard of it, don't currently need it, and you won't even get it for 2 weeks.
And this happens literally millions of times a day. And honestly, the most terrifying, or I guess brilliant, depending on your perspective, part of that transaction is that you probably think you made a completely rational choice.
Right. You think you evaluated the product.
Exactly. You think you bought it based on its merits. But the reality is that your brain's oldest evolutionary hardware was just hijacked, systematically hijacked by a highly engineered environment that's designed to just bypass your critical thinking completely.
And that exact intersection is what we are unpacking today. We are pulling apart this incredibly complex, mostly invisible space where human neurology, influencer culture, and digital commerce all smashed together.
It's a wild space to navigate.
It really is. And if you are listening to this right now and you operate an e-commerce store, maybe you're trying to scale a Shopify brand or you're trying to figure out your direct-to-consumer ad budget, this is the hidden matrix you are operating inside.
Yeah, you aren't just, buying ad placements or sponsoring posts anymore.
No, you are plugging your inventory directly into a high-stakes, biologically driven trust system. And the main thesis of this deep dive is that mastering the illusion of digital friendship is basically the single most potent conversion engine in the modern economy.
Which is huge, because it fundamentally rewrites the rules of marketing. For nearly a century, the golden rule was just simple math. Reach equals revenue.
The billboard approach.
Right. If you want to sell more soap, you buy a bigger billboard. You buy a Super Bowl commercial. You get a massive Hollywood celebrity to hold the soap, and you blast it out to 50 million people. The assumption was always that volume cures all ills.
Like, if your conversion rate is low, just dump more people into the top of the funnel.
Exactly. But the data we're looking at shows that the old math is just breaking down.
Okay, let's unpack this because I want to lead with the highest value information for an online merchant right now. We were looking at this industry research that started surfacing around 2017, specifically looking at consumer trust on platforms like Instagram.
And the numbers completely defy that bigger is better logic.
They totally do. If a brand gives a product to a mega celebrity with, say, 40 million followers, the actual purchase intent generated among the audience is staggeringly low, especially when you compare it to giving that exact same product to a micro-influencer with maybe 40,000 followers.
Which is wild, because 40,000 followers is a rounding error to a celebrity.
Right. It's like a slightly crowded local food festival. So why is the math inverting here? Why does the smaller audience convert so much harder?
Well, it comes down to a psychological framework called perceived similarity. If we want to understand why a consumer actually opens their wallet, we have to look at how human beings are evolutionarily wired to evaluate the source of information.
Because we don't just absorb data neutrally.
No, not at all. We run it through this instant, totally unconscious filter based on who is delivering the message. We naturally weigh information coming from an in-group member, someone we perceive as being fundamentally like us. We weigh that exponentially heavier than information from an out-group member.
Okay, I want to challenge that slightly, just playing devil's advocate, because aspirational marketing has worked for decades. Like, people bought Air Jordans because they wanted to be Michael Jordan.
Right, not because he was just like them.
Exactly. We know celebrities are out-group members, but we still buy the luxury cars or the ridiculous watches they endorse.
Sure, but aspirational marketing operates on a very different and honestly much more expensive psychological axis. It's about status signaling.
Okay, tell me more about that.
When you buy the luxury watch that the celebrity endorses, you aren't buying it because you genuinely believe, that the celebrity researched the gear mechanisms and thinks it's a practical, durable choice.
Yeah, you buy it to borrow a fraction of their status.
Exactly. But modern direct-to-consumer e-commerce, if you're on Shopify selling a $50 minimalist wallet, or a new brand of oat milk, or a specialized travel backpack that relies on practical peer-to-peer validation, and that is where perceived similarity completely dominates.
Because the baseline context of their lives matches ours.
You got it.
Like, when a massive celebrity posts a morning routine video holding a bottle of generic $18 shampoo, my brain immediately flags a contextual error.
Your brain knows it's fake.
Right. I know they live in a gated compound in Calabasas. I know they have, like, a private esthetician, a lighting crew, a personal chef. My brain categorizes them as an outgroup member whose daily constraints just do not match my own. So their recommendation is fundamentally unbelievable.
It registers as a paid performance, it's a commercial, but contrast that with the micro-influencer. This is someone who occupies a really specific niche.
Like budget backpacking through Southeast Asia.
Or organizing a tiny, cramped studio apartment in Chicago. When the audience watches their videos, they see a peer. They see someone who complains about the same rising grocery prices, deals with the same delayed flights, and struggles with the exact same lack of closet space.
And because those constraints are shared, the trust is inherent. The shared constraints are essentially the proof of authenticity.
Yes. What's fascinating here is that if you look at our evolutionary past, if someone in your immediate tribe, someone who hunts in the same woods and faces the same winter weather, if they told you the berries near the river were poisonous, your survival depended on believing them instantly.
Wow, okay. But if a stranger from a distant, much wealthier tribe arrived and offered you food, you'd be naturally skeptical.
Highly skeptical. And the micro-influencer reads to our primal hardware as that tribe member. When they recommend a product, it completely bypasses the critical advertising filters.
It doesn't read as a sponsored placement. It reads as a knowledgeable neighbor leaning over the fence to give you a tip.
Exactly, a neighborly tip.
I want to put this in concrete terms for you, the listener, who is managing a marketing budget right now. What this research means is that if you have $50,000 to spend on an influencer campaign, blowing it all on one massive account with 5 million followers is incredibly inefficient.
You're paying a huge premium for pure reach.
Yeah, but you're buying into an outgroup dynamic where the audience's skeptical filters are on high alert. Your return on ad spend, your ROAS, is going to suffer. But if you take that same $50,000 and distribute it across 20 different micro-influencers in your specific niche, you aren't just buying reach anymore.
You're renting trust.
Renting trust. It's like local word of mouth versus a billboard. A billboard gets a million eyeballs, but your neighbor saying, hey, buy this lawnmower is what actually gets the sale.
That perceived similarity creates a profound credibility gap that traditional ads just cannot cross. Followers of micro-influencers report feeling that the creator actually cares about their well-being.
They feel a real connection.
They genuinely believe the creator would face social repercussions within their own community if they recommended a faulty product.
Yeah.
The celebrity doesn't face that. Their wealth insulates them. But the micro-influencer's main currency is their localized reputation.
But, okay, I buy the neighbor theory on paper. Yet, in reality, it takes me years to build genuine trust with an actual physical neighbor.
Right, you have to interact with them constantly.
Exactly. I need to see how they handle a misdelivered package, or how loud they play their music, or how they talk to my kids. But these online consumers are establishing that level of intense neighborly trust in a matter of weeks.
Sometimes even days.
And it's through a glowing rectangle of glass with someone they have never shared physical space with. How is that deep connection happening so incredibly fast on a mass scale?
To answer that, we actually have to look back long before the internet even existed.
Yeah.
The architecture of this dynamic is rooted in a concept called parasocial relationships.
Okay, I've heard that term thrown around a lot lately.
Yeah, it's very buzzy now, but the term was actually coined way back in 1956 by two sociologists, Donald Horton and Richard Wall.
1956. So we are talking about the era of 3 channels, black and white screens, and those massive pieces of wooden furniture dominating the living room.
Exactly. Horton and Wall were trying to understand this bizarre new behavioral phenomenon that was sweeping the country after the mass adoption of the television set. They were observing audiences watching early talk show hosts, news anchors, sitcom actors.
And what did they notice?
They noticed that viewers were developing these intense, incredibly real feelings of familiarity and intimacy with these personalities. People would literally write impassioned letters to soap opera characters, warning them that another character was plotting against them.
Oh, wow, like they thought it was real life.
Yes, or they felt genuine grief when a fictional character died, or when a talk show host seemed to just be having a bad day.
Because I guess before the 1950s, the only faces you saw speaking directly to you in the intimate setting of your own home were your actual family members.
Right. The human brain had never needed a mechanism to distinguish between a real face in the living room and a broadcast face in the living room.
That makes so much sense.
Horton and Voll recognized this was a profound shift in human social structures. So they used the prefix para, which means alongside or resembling, to describe these relationships. And the defining characteristic of a parasocial bond is its fundamental asymmetry.
Meaning it's one-sided.
Completely. One side of the viewer is investing massive amounts of social attention, emotional energy, and time, and the other side, the broadcaster, has absolutely no awareness that this specific viewer even exists.
It is a one-way street, completely masquerading as a two-way street.
Exactly.
But if Horton and Wall thought a blurry black and white image of Johnny Carson sitting behind a desk 20 feet away was creating intense intimacy, what is happening to the brain now?
It's a whole different level.
I mean, today we are holding 4K screens 6 inches from our faces. We're wearing noise-canceling earbuds. We are literally bringing these people into bed with us at night.
The intensity has scaled exponentially, and the medium itself has been weaponized to strip away all the remaining boundaries. Television was still a broadcast medium, you know. It felt somewhat formal.
Right, there was a stage, a set, a clear separation.
But social media is an immersive conversational medium. Influencers aren't speaking from a soundstage. They're speaking from the front seat of their car while waiting in a drive-thru.
Or from their bathroom mirror while brushing their teeth.
Exactly. And they deliberately use a register of voice that mimics a FaceTime call with a close friend.
They also use incredibly specific, inclusive language, like, "Good morning, fam," or "What are we thinking about this outfit today? I need your help with a decision." They pluralize the entire experience.
And in sociology, those are referred to as parasocial maintenance behaviors. They are deliberate actions engineered to simulate the reciprocity of a genuine relationship.
Without actually requiring the influencer to carry the cognitive load of knowing the individuals.
Right. They run interactive polls. They ask questions in their captions. They might reply to 3 or 4 comments out of thousands. And this is where the biological trap snaps shut. The human brain's social circuitry simply cannot process the scale of the internet.
So, wait, what does this all mean? Are our brains just easily tricked, or is the technology just that good? Are we essentially walking around with Pleistocene-era hardware trying to run TikTok?
That is exactly what is happening. We are running software designed for a tribe of about 150 people, but we're in an information environment of 3 billion people.
It's a massive mismatch.
It's a structural feature of human cognition operating in an abnormal environment. When your rational mind sees an influencer making direct eye contact with the camera lens, it logically knows they're looking at a piece of glass.
Right, we aren't stupid.
We aren't. But the older, deeper parts of your brain, the amygdala, the regions processing facial recognition and social cues, they do not register that logic. They see a human face looking directly at them, speaking in a warm tone in an intimate setting.
So the brain essentially forces a social bond, even against our own intellectual better judgment.
Yeah, the contextual cues we normally use to categorize a relationship as fake have just been completely stripped away. The platform removes the friction of reality.
What do you mean by the friction of reality?
Well, think about the real world. Relationships require immense labor. You have to compromise. You have to endure awkward silences. You have to support the other person when they are being really difficult.
Yeah, friendship is hard work.
But a parasocial relationship provides all the neurological warmth of a friendship with 0 friction and 0 risk of rejection. When an influencer randomly likes a comment you left on their photo, the neural response in your brain is functionally identical to being recognized and praised in person by someone you deeply admire.
Okay, tying this back to the e-commerce operator. If you are selling a product online, understanding this parasocial trust explains the astronomical conversion rates of influencer marketing.
It really does.
You are leveraging a relationship where the friction has already been removed. You're using parasocial trust to short-circuit the normal, logical buyer evaluation process.
Think about the cognitive load of a normal purchase. A consumer sees a Facebook ad for, let's say, your new Shopify coffee machine.
Their brain immediately goes into defensive evaluation mode.
Exactly. They ask, is this a scam? Are these reviews fake? Can I get it cheaper on Amazon? Do I actually need a new coffee machine? They're expending cognitive energy to resist the sale.
The skeptical filter is set to maximum.
But when an influencer they have formed a 2-year parasocial bond with recommends that exact same coffee machine, the cognitive pathway changes entirely.
The brain doesn't evaluate the specs of the machine.
No, the brain asks a completely different, much simpler question. Would my friend recommend something bad?
Oh, wow. Would my friend recommend something bad?
And because the consumer has watched this person make their kids breakfast, celebrate their anniversaries, walk their dog every single day for 2 years, the brain automatically supplies the answer.
No, my friend wouldn't steer me wrong. The objective evaluation of the product is entirely replaced by the subjective evaluation of the relationship.
The parasocial investment builds a bridge right over the consumer's skepticism.
But if parasocial bonds lower the consumer's guard that much, what specific type of content acts as the ultimate Trojan horse for product placement? Because not every post an influencer makes builds that bridge.
That's a great point.
Like, if an influencer only posts heavily edited, hyper-polished photos of their yacht vacations, I might envy them, but I don't feel like they are my friend. Envy doesn't neutralize the skeptical filter the way empathy does. So how do they deliberately trigger that deep empathy?
They do it through what researchers in 2017 identified as the expressive performance of vulnerability. And this is arguably the most powerful and ethically complex mechanism in the entire digital commerce landscape.
Manufactured vulnerability. I mean, it sounds incredibly cynical.
It sounds cynical, but it is structurally profound. The research noted that highly successful influencers do not just share their triumphs. They systematically share deep personal struggles with their audience.
Right. They will turn the camera on and discuss their severe anxiety disorders or the fact that their relationship is falling apart.
Or the crushing financial pressure of a recent mistake. Deep-seated body image issues.
We see this format constantly now. The Get Ready With Me video where the creator is sitting on their bathroom floor, completely unposed, holding back tears while talking about a massive personal failure.
Or the raw, unedited photo showing a severe acne breakout, accompanied by like a 1,000-word caption about feeling unlovable.
And you have to look at the immediate biological effect that content has on the audience. It triggers a sudden, overwhelming sense of intimacy.
The audience feels like they've been granted exclusive access behind the polished curtain. Empathy spikes.
The influencer transforms from a two-dimensional broadcaster into a complex, suffering, three-dimensional human being. And as a result, their credibility within the community solidifies to an almost unbreakable degree.
And this is exactly where the commerce layer intersects. Because the very next post, or sometimes literally the very next sentence in the same video, is a product recommendation.
Yes. And any product recommended in close proximity to that vulnerability carries what sociologists call the halo of authenticity.
It's the whiplash of modern social media. They are crying about their social anxiety, and in the next breath, they say, which is why I've been taking these specific CBD gummies.
My question is, how does the audience not immediately feel manipulated by that? How do they not see the jarring transition from tears to a discount code?
Because empathy paralyzes the critical faculties. It's like a magician making you look at his left hand while his right hand pockets your watch.
That is a perfect analogy.
The vulnerability is so emotionally overwhelming that it acts as massive misdirection. The brain literally cannot process the transition into a sales pitch because all of its cognitive bandwidth is spent processing the empathy for the friend in pain.
I have to pause here because we need to clarify something for you, the listener.
Yeah.
Are we implying that these influencers are sociopaths? Like, are they faking panic attacks with a bottle of moisturizer carefully positioned in the frame just to drive affiliate clicks?
No, and that is a crucial nuance. Sincerity and commercial function are not mutually exclusive.
Okay, break that down.
An influencer can be genuinely struggling with a real panic attack. They can be having a truly devastating day. And they can understand that documenting this authentic moment serves a dual purpose as a highly effective gateway for a brand partnership later in the week.
Because they are professional communicators.
Exactly. They understand their medium. A video titled, "I've been feeling completely lost lately," can be 100% sincere, while simultaneously acting as the single highest converting piece of content for their sponsor.
So, if you are looking at your Shopify analytics and you suddenly see a massive spike in sales from a specific influencer link, look at the content that preceded it.
It is almost always a moment of intense vulnerability.
The audience's guard was down, their desire to support their friend was high, and your product was positioned right there as a tangible way for the audience to participate in the influencer's life.
But this exact mechanism is where merchants face a massive, non-negotiable ethical boundary.
Yes, let's draw a very bright line here.
If you're running a brand, you must never, under any circumstances, engineer or mandate this sequence.
Oh, absolutely not.
If you give an influencer a creative brief that says, hey, we want you to start the video by manufacturing a story about an emotional struggle and then pivot to selling our inventory, you have crossed the line from marketing into psychological exploitation.
You are actively weaponizing the audience's parasocial trust for a short-term conversion metric. It reminds me of those multi-level marketing pitches.
MLM tactic, yeah.
Friend comes over, they cry on your shoulder for an hour about how hard their life is, and the second you feel maximum empathy for them, they suddenly wipe their tears, reach into their bag, and hand you a catalog for essential oils.
It feels deeply violating.
It does. It feels gross if it's planned. And the business consequence of that violation is severe. Long-term e-commerce success relies entirely on the sustainability of the influencer's community.
Protecting the audience, not just targeting them.
Exactly. If an audience senses that their empathy was harvested by a brand, they don't just reject the product, they reject the influencer and they actively turn against the brand.
Once that specific type of intimate trust is burned, the ecosystem collapses. You destroy the community, and your brand becomes associated with deceit.
So the operational rule for the merchant is passive integration. If the influencer wants to organically integrate your product into their vulnerable content because it genuinely fits their life, that is their domain. But you cannot pull those emotional strings.
Correct. As a brand, you are a guest in a fragile emotional ecosystem. You must act with the deference of a guest.
Okay, so we've established the architecture. We know that perceived similarity builds trust. Parasocial bonds remove friction, and vulnerability lowers the defensive filter.
Right.
But we still haven't answered the foundational question of motivation. Why do we care so much? Why do we spend 3 hours a day scrolling through the lives of strangers, actively seeking out these hits of intimacy?
To understand the sheer gravitational pull of this system, we have to look under the hood at the neurological engine driving the entire platform.
And that engine runs almost exclusively on one specific neurotransmitter, dopamine.
Yes. But before we get into the mechanics, we really have to correct the massive cultural misunderstanding of what dopamine actually is.
Oh, definitely. Pop culture constantly refers to it as the pleasure chemical. Like a hit of dopamine is just a burst of pure joy.
That framing is dangerously misleading, especially in the context of behavioral design. Dopamine is not a reward. It is a neurotransmitter that carries signals between neurons, and it's heavily involved in motivation, learning, and reinforcing behavior.
So what is it, if not pleasure?
It is much more accurately understood as a signal for anticipated value.
Wait, really? You're saying the pleasure isn't the dopamine at all, it's just the anticipation?
Exactly. Dopamine tells your brain, pay attention to this environment, remember exactly the sequence of steps you took to get here, and do this again. It is the biological engine of craving.
That completely flips how most people think about it.
And here is the most crucial neurological fact upon which the entire digital economy is built. Dopamine neurons fire most strongly, not when a reward actually arrives, but when a reward is expected.
The spike happens in the waiting.
Yes, and the signal reaches its absolute highest peak when that expected reward is completely uncertain.
Uncertain. So a prediction error.
Precisely. Your brain is essentially a highly advanced prediction machine. Its primary job is to model the environment to figure out what happens next, to ensure your survival.
Makes sense.
If a reward in your environment is 100% predictable, your brain figures it out, models it as a fixed, boring event, and the dopamine response flattens out to conserve energy. You don't need motivation to seek out something that is guaranteed.
But if a prediction might or might not pay off...
If the outcome is uncertain, the brain can never fully learn what to expect. The prediction error never resolves. Therefore, the anticipatory dopamine signal never fades. It stays constantly elevated, driving you to repeat the behavior endlessly in an attempt to solve the puzzle.
This takes us all the way back to the behavioral psychology of the 1950s, right? To the work of B.F. Skinner and Charles Furster.
It does. Long before iPhones, Skinner and Furster mapped out how different reward schedules affect the behavior of biological organisms. They use operant conditioning chambers, what we usually call Skinner boxes, to observe rats and pigeons.
They were looking at levers and food dispensers, basically.
Right. They wanted to see how the timing of a reward like a food pellet, changed how often an animal would press a lever or peck a key. And they identified a few basic structural schedules.
Like the fixed ratio schedule.
Exactly, where the reward comes after every specific number of actions.
Mm.
Press a lever 3 times, get 1 pellet every single time. Then there is a fixed interval schedule, where the reward comes after a specific amount of time.
Like getting a paycheck every 2 weeks, or an e-commerce brand sending out a newsletter every single Friday at exactly 8:00 a.m.
Yes, and what Skinner found is that fixed schedules produce very predictable but somewhat lazy behavior.
The subject knows exactly what is required, does the minimum to get the reward, and then stops. There's no urgency.
But then they introduced variable ratio and variable interval schedules.
The unpredictable schedules.
This is where the reward comes after an unpredictable number of actions, or an unpredictable amount of time. Press the lever once, get a pellet. Press it 40 times, get nothing. Press it twice, get a massive pile of pellets.
And the results were crazy, right?
What Skinner observed was profound. The variable ratio schedule produced the most frantic, obsessive, and persistent behavior. It is also the most resistant to extinction.
Extinction meaning stopping the behavior.
Right. If you turn off the food dispenser entirely, a pigeon on a variable schedule will keep pecking the key thousands of times longer than a pigeon on a fixed schedule.
Because the brain keeps screaming, maybe the next one is the payout, maybe the next one. It can't accept that the pattern is over because there never was a pattern.
This is the exact mechanism behind a slot machine. You pull the lever, and you never know if you are going to lose your dollar, win $2, or hit a $10,000 jackpot.
That uncertainty creates a massive dopamine spike.
And it is the exact same mechanism behind checking your phone. Think about this from a digital marketing perspective. If you are sending that fixed Friday newsletter, your customer's brain knows exactly when it's coming.
There is zero uncertainty, which means there is zero anticipatory dopamine.
It is incredibly easy for them to ignore the email or delete it without opening it. But social media platforms do not deliver fixed rewards. They are massive, global slot machines.
The notifications, the likes, the comments, the direct messages, they all arrive on variable schedules.
You don't know when the phone will buzz, and when it does, you don't know if it's a spam email, a text from your boss, or a message from someone you are romantically interested in. The uncertainty forces you to look.
And the influencers are running this exact same schedule on their audiences.
Absolutely. An influencer's feed is a masterclass in variable ratio delivery. Think about the cadence of their content. On Monday, they might post a completely mundane picture of their coffee cup.
A low-value reward.
On Tuesday, they post a highly produced fashion shot. On Wednesday, there is silence. On Thursday, they suddenly post a deeply vulnerable video about a personal crisis.
A massive high-value emotional reward. And then on Friday, they drop a limited-time 20% off code for your Shopify store.
You, the audience member, keep coming back. You keep scrolling because you cannot perfectly model what the next tap of the screen will reveal. The uncertainty itself becomes the psychological hook.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and this is the crucial layer for an e-commerce operator. When your target customer is lying on the couch scrolling through TikTok, they are actively running a dopamine loop.
They are in a highly receptive, highly engaged neurological state.
Right, and it's being actively maintained by a region of their brain called the ventral striatum. And your ad, your product placement, is dropping right into the middle of this neurological slot machine.
Your objective is to intersect with their attention while they are primed in this state, but to do so without jarring them out of it.
I want to pause on the ventral striatum because there were some landmark studies from Ulm University around 2013 and 2017 where researchers actually put heavy social media users into fMRI machines to look at what was happening physically in their brains.
The Ulm studies are foundational. The researchers simulated social media environments while scanning the participants' brains. They found that receiving positive social feedback online, like seeing their reputation praised or accumulating likes, aggressively activated the ventral striatum.
And the ventral striatum is the same region that lights up for biological imperatives, right? Like finding high-calorie food when you're starving or receiving monetary rewards.
Yeah, it is the core of the brain's reward circuitry. It is also the region heavily implicated in behavioral addictions.
Oh, wow.
The Ulm researchers went further and examined the personality traits associated with heavy social media use, and they found significant measurable overlap with the traits linked to addictive behaviors like gambling.
Meaning compulsive engagement, building a tolerance, and a profound difficulty disengaging, even when the behavior causes negative consequences in their personal lives.
Now, we need to be careful with our terminology here. We aren't saying that scrolling a social feed is chemically identical to smoking crack cocaine.
No, of course not. It's crucial not to overstate the physical dependency.
It is not a chemical substance addiction, but the underlying neural circuitry being recruited and exploited by the app is the exact same pathway that addictive substances target.
And you have to remember, the platforms are not doing this accidentally. They are deploying teams of behavioral psychologists to optimize the environment for this exact neurological outcome.
Because their entire business model relies on time, on platform. Daily active users, scroll depth. These metrics are direct, quantifiable proxies for dopamine loop engagement.
The longer your ventral striatum is engaged, the more ads they can serve you and the more revenue they generate.
The incentive to maximize the activation of your dopamine loop is the foundational architecture of the internet.
So, if the platforms are building the casino and the influencers are the ones dealing the cards, how do all these pieces, the dopamine, the influencer, and your specific product, fit into a repeatable cycle?
To map that out practically, we look to the hooked model, which was developed by Nir Eyal in his 2014 book.
Such a good book.
Eyal brilliantly deconstructed how technology products successfully build habitual behavior into a four-part self-reinforcing cycle. If you are a merchant, understanding this machine is how you locate exactly where your product fits into the sequence.
Let's walk through the four parts. Step one is the trigger.
Triggers can be external or internal. An external trigger is the physical prompt. The ping of a push notification, the vibration in your pocket, the red-unread badge on the app icon.
It's a call to action from the outside environment.
But the ultimate goal of any successful platform is to graduate the user to internal triggers.
Right. Internal triggers are emotional states. Boredom, loneliness, a sudden spike of anxiety, the fear of missing out.
Yes. Once an internal trigger is firmly established, the app doesn't need to spend money sending you notifications anymore. The environment triggers the behavior automatically.
The second you feel a micro pang of boredom while waiting in line at the grocery store, your hand automatically reaches for your phone without a conscious thought. The negative emotion itself prompts the behavior.
Okay, so the trigger fires. Step 2 is the action. The action must be the simplest possible behavior performed in anticipation of a reward. Opening the app, tapping a story icon, scrolling down with one flick of the thumb.
The critical element here is the removal of friction.
Absolute removal.
Yeah.
Friction is the enemy of the habit loop. If the app takes 3 seconds to load, or if it requires you to log in every time, the probability of the habit loop completing plummets.
This is why the infinite scroll is such a devastatingly effective piece of UI design. In the early days of the internet, you had to click next page to see more content. That click was a stopping cue.
It gave the rational brain a millisecond to ask, do I want to keep doing this? The infinite scroll removes the stopping cue entirely. The action becomes frictionless and continuous.
So you're scrolling smoothly. Step 3 is the payout, the variable reward.
Eyal identifies 3 specific categories of variable rewards that keep us hooked. First, the reward of the tribe. This is our deep biological need for social approval, connection, and recognition.
Vulnerability falls in there.
Second, the reward of the hunt. Originally, this was foraging for food. Today, it is the search for novel information, a piece of gossip, or a massive discount.
And third, the reward of the self. This is the internal feeling of completion, mastery, or clearing your inbox.
And a social media feed is the ultimate behavioral trap because it delivers all 3 of these rewards simultaneously and entirely unpredictably.
Right. When you tap an influencer's profile, you don't know which slot machine you are playing. You might get a vulnerable update about their mental health, a high-value reward of the tribe.
You might participate in a poll about what they should wear, a reward of the self.
Or, crucially, you might stumble upon a flash sale. They are promoting the reward of the hunt.
And because you don't know what's coming, you keep pulling the lever. Which brings us to the final step that locks the whole thing in, the investment.
The investment is the genius of the system. After receiving the reward, the platform asks the user to do a tiny bit of work that makes the next cycle more likely.
They leave a comment, they save a post to a mood board, they share a video with a friend.
Why does that lock them in?
Because leaving a comment increases their emotional stake in the platform. They now have a new internal trigger anticipation waiting to see if the influencer likes their comment or replies to it. Each investment essentially loads the spring for the next trigger. The cycle accelerates.
I want to break down exactly where the online merchant fits here. Where does the Shopify store owner fit into this 4-step loop?
You have to realize that you, the merchant, are not building the habit loop. The platform built the trigger and the action. The influencer built the investment.
So what are we doing?
You are essentially renting a slot inside the variable reward phase of an existing dopamine loop. The influencer provides the reward of the tribe through their parasocial intimacy.
And your product, especially if it includes a discount code or a limited drop, provides the reward of the hunt.
Exactly. You are renting a slot in an existing dopamine loop. The key for merchants is ensuring your product genuinely fits that slot.
So the merchant's job is to ensure their product genuinely satisfies the psychological need of the hunt, rather than being a jarring interruption that breaks the user's flow and causes resentment.
Yes. If your product integration is clunky, forced, or misaligned with the influencer's aesthetic, it acts as friction. It breaks the dopamine loop and the user scrolls past. But if it is integrated seamlessly, the user's brain processes the purchase of your product as the successful completion of the hunt.
Are we just reducing human connection to a four-step mechanical loop? If I take a step back and look at this logically, it sounds incredibly mechanical. It feels like a very cynical way to view humanity.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it sounds cynical, but we have to separate the experience from the infrastructure. The feelings of the user are entirely real.
Okay.
When a consumer feels empathy for an influencer's struggles, that is a genuine human emotion. When they feel the joy of finding a beautiful product that solves a problem in their life, that joy is real.
So the feelings are real, but the delivery system is mechanical.
It is engineered. Understanding the machine makes you a more responsible merchant. It prevents you from accidentally abusing a system whose power you underestimate.
But the influencer and the merchant aren't acting alone here. There's an invisible third party shaping this entire ecosystem, directing traffic, and deciding who goes viral and who disappears.
The algorithm.
Right. And to understand what the algorithm prioritizes, we have to look at human behavior from the supply side. Why do people post what they post in the first place? Specifically, we need to talk about the neurological drive for self-disclosure.
There were a series of brilliant illuminating experiments run at Harvard in 2012 by researchers Diana Tamir and Jason Mitchell. They wanted to isolate the neurology of talking about oneself.
What did they do?
They put participants in fMRI machines and gave them a choice. They could answer factual questions about other people, or they could answer subjective questions about their own personal opinions and traits.
And what did the scans show?
They showed that the act of self-disclosure inherently, intensely activates the reward-related regions of the brain. The nucleus accumbens the ventral tegmental area.
The same reward regions we've been talking about.
In fact, the biological reward of talking about oneself is so strong that the researchers introduced a financial element. They offered to pay participants small amounts of money if they chose to answer questions about other people instead.
Wait, they offered them cash to not talk about themselves?
Yes, and the participants literally forfeited financial compensation. They paid, in opportunity cost, just for the biological privilege of talking about themselves.
That is wild. Self-disclosure is inherently rewarding, independent of any response it receives from the outside world.
This explains so much about the life cycle of an influencer. It explains why they inevitably drift toward oversharing.
It is a profound dual feedback loop. Posting highly personal content is neurologically reinforcing for the creator doing the posting. It feels good to them biologically.
So you see influencers who start out making purely informational content. Maybe they just post 5-second videos showing how to properly fold a fitted sheet or how to organize a toolbox.
But over time, they inevitably drift toward more personal lifestyle territory. They start showing their living room, then their spouse, then their arguments.
Because producing the personal content is biologically more rewarding than producing the sterile informational content.
And simultaneously, it is more engaging for the audience because our evolutionary wiring forces us to pay attention to self-disclosure.
Yes. In our ancestral environment, if someone shared highly personal, vulnerable information with you, it was a massive social signal. It meant you were trusted.
It meant a critical survival alliance was forming. Your brain is hardwired to drop everything and pay extreme attention to that signal.
And the algorithm, which is constantly watching, notices this behavioral shift immediately.
But the algorithm is just math. It has no opinion on mental health or product quality. It doesn't know what vulnerability or trust is. How is it measuring this?
The algorithm is blind to human emotion, but it has perfect vision for human behavior at a granular level. It tracks dwell time, how long you pause your thumb on a specific post.
It tracks whether you scroll back up to reread a long emotional caption.
It tracks completion rates on videos, and it tracks the velocity of comments. When an influencer posts something emotional or vulnerable, the audience's evolutionary wiring kicks in. They stop scrolling, they read the whole caption.
And the algorithm sees that dwell time spike and says, aha, whatever is in this specific piece of content, it is incredibly effective at paralyzing the user and keeping them on the app.
Precisely. Because messy, emotional, vulnerable content holds human attention far longer than a polished, sterile product tutorial. The algorithm naturally, mechanically rewards the emotional content with wider distribution.
E-commerce operators, this is the most critical dynamic you can understand about your digital spend. The algorithm only optimizes for one metric: engagement.
When you pay an influencer to promote your product, you are leveraging an algorithmic feedback loop that inherently aggressively favors emotional resonance over rational utility.
Therefore, choosing creators who understand how to organically blend your product with algorithm-friendly emotional content without crossing that ethical line is the secret to high ROI campaigns.
Absolutely.
I want to turn this around on the consumer for a second. Are we just training the algorithm to manipulate us? Are we at fault here?
That is the most uncomfortable truth of the entire digital ecosystem. You are not a passive recipient of your feed. Every single interaction is a vote.
Every pause, every save, every reply.
Every time you pause on a dramatic story, every time you screenshot a vulnerable post, you are feeding the machine data. You are training the algorithm to serve you more of the exact specific stimuli that successfully activates your dopamine loop. The user is both the product and the co-producer.
We are essentially building the bars of our own digital cages. And with all of this immense neurological and algorithmic power pointed directly at the consumer, what are the rules of engagement for the seller?
This brings us to the transparency obligation and the reality of long-term commerce. Regulators are not entirely blind to this dynamic.
Right, sponsored content, affiliate links, FTC disclosure guidelines.
We have to look at why regulatory bodies implement strict disclosure guidelines. The obvious answer is so people know they're looking at an ad. But why is it so critical that the state forces them to know?
Because regulators recognize that against the overwhelming power of parasocial trust, consumers cannot reliably spot a paid recommendation on their own.
Exactly. If the parasocial trust wasn't so incredibly persuasive, FTC disclosures wouldn't be necessary at all. You would just evaluate an influencer's recommendation the exact same rational way you evaluate a random stranger's text review on an Amazon product page.
You'd look at the features, check the price, and move on.
But you don't. The forced disclosure is a regulatory attempt to forcibly re-engage the consumer's critical thinking before the transaction happens.
But I was reading studies on advertising literacy, and the research shows that even when a consumer explicitly knows they are being marketed to, even when the post says paid partnership at the top, they are still heavily influenced.
The parasocial bond is often stronger than the rational awareness of the disclosure. A labeled post is the absolute legal minimum required to avoid a fine. But the ethical standard is much higher.
It's like putting a tiny warning label on a roller coaster. People are still going to ride it because all their friends are on it.
This raises an important question. How does a merchant operate responsibly and profitably in a space where the consumer's defenses are this easily bypassed?
The ultimate takeaway for the online seller is that disclosure alone does not protect your customer from buying something they don't need. That falls on you, the merchant.
So what are the practical steps? First, extreme alignment. Only partner with influencers whose audience genuinely, practically overlaps with your ideal customer profile.
Don't throw money at a creator just because they have high engagement and a cheap rate. Selling high-end financial software through an influencer whose audience is primarily teenagers struggling with anxiety is not marketing. It is extraction.
And second, product honesty. Do not pressure influencers to omit material limitations of your product.
Right. If you rely on parasocial shortcuts to sell bad products, you might get a massive spike in sales this week, but you burn the influencer's trust permanently and your brand's future.
The marketers who build durable, multi-million-dollar Shopify brands treat the influencer's audience as a community to be served, not a resource to be extracted. The trust belongs to the influencer. You are just borrowing it.
What an incredibly complex journey we've been on today. We started by looking at why micro-influencers drive sales better than celebrities, unpacking perceived similarity.
We dove into the 1950s origins of parasocial bonds and Horton and Wool.
We saw how platforms simulate intimacy and how manufactured vulnerability acts as a Trojan horse. We looked at the neurological engine dopamine, prediction errors, and Skinner boxes.
We saw how algorithms blindly amplify self-disclosure based on dwell time.
And finally, we landed on the profound ethical responsibility of the online merchant who operates within this matrix. To you, the listener, knowing why dopamine fires and urgency converts makes you incredibly powerful in the e-commerce space. The choice is how you wield that power in your own store.
And as we close, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. If algorithms are already this good at simulating intimacy to sell us products through human influencers, what happens to e-commerce when AI can perfectly simulate a micro-influencer,
Oh.
customized precisely to your unique neurological vulnerabilities? When the illusion of friendship becomes mathematically perfect, who do we trust then?
A chilling thought, and one we will all have to face much sooner rather than later. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We'll catch you next time.